Hello, everybody. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are. I'm going to get started. I know we're a minute or so late. We've got a lot of people joining still at the moment, but I do want to get started because I've got quite a lot of material to get through. So normally I say welcome from London because normally I'm in London, but right now I'm actually in Bangkok. So welcome from Bangkok, wherever everybody's joining from. So hopefully it's not midnight for all of you there as well. What I did want to do is just focus. We've run a lot of these webinars in the past months, focusing on how you could leverage Docshifter in different ways to help automate a lot of your content preparation processes you may have in place. What we're going to look at today is how we could inject the use of some artificial intelligence in there as well. We're going to kind of see how you can combine that automation with Docshifter, with the Docshifter platform, with some AI elements as well, to further kind of bring value to those processes and automate via the use of some AI. So with that, I'm just going to get started. Just kind of quickly walk through here. Just quickly have some intros to begin with. Talk through it just to provide some context around the content preparation, what I mean by it, and some of the automation that's possible for content preparation. Let's just give you like a setup for how you could include some AI in there. We're going to focus on a couple of example scenarios around translating content, redacting content, and then also look at some complex scenarios where you combine translation with other elements as well to provide more of an end-to-end process as well, and just provide some final thoughts at the end. So for those that were watching the video to begin with, the slide was already in there. So as we often do, there's a little surprise. If every 25th registrant that signed up for the event will receive a small gift. So marketing may be reaching out to some of you just to ask for some details so that can be sent through. So don't worry, it's a low value item, so it's shouldn't get you in trouble with your company at all anyway, but just in case you receive that notification. Also just want to let you know about an upcoming webinar, really looking at how you can replace some desktop tools that kind of help you with different kind of very manual processes in your content preparation as well. You may be using tools like Acrobat and Toolbox solutions to help perform some specific tasks around PDF bookmarking or hyperlinking. And we're looking at we're running a session specifically on how you can replace those desktop tools with some form of centralized solution as well. So that session will be on December the 5th. Depending on where you are, there's obviously the times displayed there as well. But obviously, you should be receiving some notification about that webinar as well. With that, just a quick intro to ourselves. We at Docshifter provide automated high-volume content preparation kind of platform. It's ultimately a platform that performs many tasks, not just conversion of content or rendering, as many people refer to it as, but it performs various content analysis, fixing, conversion of content, and enrichment. So we take content from some input repositories. We'll talk about this in more detail as we go. We take content, we analyze it, transform it, enrich it, and then produce the results somewhere in some output repository as well, typically in high volumes. Those solutions are typically installed on-premise or in your private cloud, administered centrally as well for you. It's a platform that can be scaled up for any size organization, from very small startup or biotech or smaller organizations up to your top tier companies as well. I just want to kind of point out to those of you that are joining who are existing customers, the AI elements I'm going to show you are not in our core products. So when you install Docshifter now or in the future, by default, there will be no AI technology used in the platform at all. There will be optional modules. If you decide you want to license those components, they would then be installed as a separate component on top, integrated fully into the platform. But that way, for those of you that still have some kind of security concerns around the use of AI in your technology, there is none, and there will continue to be none unless if you license these components. So with that, hopefully this will go forward for me. Thank you very much. Just in terms of content preparation, just a very brief overview, just talking through this very quickly. So those of you that have joined other webinars will have seen this before. Typically, content goes through a life cycle. It's authored, it's reviewed in manual and batch. A lot of these processes are very manual, using desktop tools as well. And typically that content at some point is obviously reviewed, it's updated, And in that update stage, we could obviously introduce the things we're going to talk a little bit more about today. Things like translation and redaction need to take place at some point in that life cycle as well. I'm including it here in the update section. At various points, it's rendered to different formats like PDF for use, whether it's in submissions or for sharing across the organization as well. And then it's prepared, the PDF may be further prepared once it's created. It's often then manipulated further to meet the specific use case that PDF is being used for. In the case of regulatory, it may be included in submissions, draft published, and validated. So just to give you some context of kind of that typical content lifecycle, as we kind of start talking through this automating the content preparation. So in terms of automating some of those steps, preparing that content, if I just pull this up, in terms of what Docshift is doing is, as I mentioned, it's taking content from different locations, whether it's, whether you're using the Ennov platform, whether you're using Veeva, Documentum, Docubridge, CARA, SharePoint, or folders on your network or email repositories, wherever that content resides, we basically look at, no matter what the format is, we're able to perform specific functions on it. So we have different components, whether it's validating the Word content, converting it from one format to another, merging multiple documents together, adding headers, footers, overlays, pagination, watermarks, TOCs, etc. All of those things are functions that you can combine in different ways within workflows to automate specific processes, depending on the use case that you're looking to use it for. You'll notice the AI components that there are kind of highlighted in red, because they're optionally installed. So by default, they're not there unless if they're actually installed once we obviously finalize them as a product, if you like. But ultimately, we combine them for different use cases, and then we output the results somewhere else. And really what you're doing is when you have specific use cases, if you're looking to prepare the content for use in, for compliance purposes, you may be combining some of the functions like the conversion to a high fidelity PDF, a compliant PDF, which includes some elements of bookmarking, hyperlinking, generation of TOCs potentially, and then validating of the PDF. Ultimately, you can combine those functions into an automated workflow. If you're talking about reports, you may be combining different elements, different functions to automatically generate reports. And again, I'm not going into detail here because we've ran separate sessions on those topics. If you take one of the AI elements, for example, translation, one of the things we'll look at a little bit today, there you may be combining, one of the new modules we have, functions to translate content, leveraging AI as well. So we have AI translation, but you could also include it in a workflow that performs other steps as well, converting the results to PDF, for example, paginating the results and adding overlays to add a header and footer, for example, as well. So as I say, the functions you combine in different ways depending on the use case. And the AI elements we're talking about are basically just going to be another step in the workflow. It's not going to be standalone, completely AI-based. It's going to leverage the existing proven automation platform and injecting AI where it makes sense and adds value to the process. So really what we do is we create these workflows, and these are created in the background. Users typically never see these, but these are what define when things should take place. Where is the content coming from? What should take place? When should it perform an action? What exactly it should perform? What actions or functions it should perform? Excuse me, and where should the results go? And ultimately, these are configured in the background, for you, and you can obviously create your own workflows in the future as well. But ultimately, all of that is kind of how we provide, if you like, the automation platform. And we've had various sessions on that. A lot of that really, the automation is really focused around reducing risk, streamlining your process, accelerating the content preparation process. And really what we're looking at doing is only using AI where it adds value. So we're not using AI from end to end. We're using it as a step within an automated, kind of an existing automated flow process. We leverage the metadata as well that you may have in your document management systems to control the usage of AI. When AI should take place, some of the parameters for what you want the function you want to perform with AI. And ultimately, we just add it as a step in an existing content workflow. And if you're using Docshifter already, that would just be another step in an existing workflow or potentially a new workflow if need be as well. So if we look at automation, including AI, so just looking at kind of bringing that in, really what we're talking about is, configured AI automation. So we can kind of combining configuration, this automation, and AI together. So we basically defined where should an action take place, and where is the content coming from? When should you perform the action? What life cycle status should it reach before we perform the action, or what triggers that action, whether that's the translation, the redaction, whatever that may be. You define that in the automation platform, the what content and how exactly that's going to take place. All of it's configured. AI is not needed for that. It's already been in place for some time with the platform. But then you can pull in these intelligent generative AI steps in there as well that perform specific functions in that flow, whether that's translating the content that's flowing through the platform, whether it's redacting from the content or some other future kind of requirement as well. You'll see percentages here, 38% and 19%. These are numbers based on Steve Gens's surveys of companies that are actually looking to automate those processes, if possible, using AI or some other kind of mechanism. So obviously there's significant interest, we're aware, within the industry to kind of automate the translation and redaction as the two examples we're going to highlight here right now. The important point is really AI is going to be one step of an automated workflow. It's just one element. It's not a standalone process in our case. It's really one part of that instead. So really the automation is the where, when, what, and how. So if you look at a workflow, we've got a number of repositories at the beginning of the workflow, which basically defines where is the content coming from that you want to process, and when exactly it should be looking in each repository. So whether that's Veeva or Documentum or Ennov or SharePoint repository or something sent via web services, you configure where within Veeva or what type of content do you want to actually process. What is the trigger within Veeva? What's the trigger within Documentum? What's the job queue? What's the trigger within SharePoint? Where are the folders that you want to monitor, for example? And when exactly, how often should you actually look for content that needs to be processed? So a lot of the where and when is defined already at the top level. The what is kind of really in the middle. You can provide some logic to say, what content should you process in which way. You may process a Word document slightly differently from a PDF file, for example. So you can add some logic in there as well. And then the how, it's kind of how do you want to kind of process the file? What is you want to do, whether that's with AI or with another step. As you see at the bottom, there's a hi-fi step. That's a non-AI step in the workflow that basically converts to a compliant PDF. But with AI, the AI step, we provide some info about, well, what do you want to do? What are the controls? In the case of translation, for example, what language do you want to convert to, for example? And what model, AI generative model, do you want to leverage in the translation service? So a lot of that we basically configure in the automation platform. These workflows are not new. These have been existing in Docshifter, obviously, for many years. That doesn't change. The only thing that's in addition here is this AI step for translation or for redaction that we'll see shortly as well. And again, once we then configure it, as I say, the AI configuration is just specifying a few criteria. And I'll talk through this a little bit with you as we go through, but these are functions that are still in development. So we're still kind of looking at integrating it with different models. We can integrate with any model, ultimately, whether that's ChatGPT. There's others available as well that we've integrated with that are both online or offline models as well. And we'll ask some questions as we go through a little bit about your use of AI models already and models that you're potentially looking to use in the future as well. But I'll kind of go through this in a little bit more detail later as well. But really the idea with the controlled AI automation is that you're able to leverage your existing content workflows. So you can take workflows that you have that are processing content, and you can also just tweak them to include AI steps, or have workflows, create new workflows that work in exactly the same way as existing content preparation flows, to include those steps instead. There's more control over when and how AI is used. If you've got this control mechanism, you're in more control over what happens exactly when it happens as well. Typically, that leads to a little bit more confidence in the process because it's a proven solution already. So it's a solution that you've typically already got. It's automated. You're just injecting another step in there to perform some additional services that weren't possible without the AI components. One of the key things is really leveraging metadata as well. And we've spoken about this a lot in the other content preparation. It's really important to leverage metadata within your content management platform. You can, one, use existing metadata. You may need to create some additional metadata if you want to automate things a little bit further. For example, what language you want to convert a document in, that might simply be a piece of metadata associated with your documents to say, these are the languages that are needed. The original language may be in English. The translation language you could set to be French, German, whatever it may be as well. So when that document is processed, it knows which languages to convert to. So the use of metadata is obviously key to driving automation of any kind, whether it's for use in the AI or non-AI workflows. Just a quick poll question at this point. So I'm just going to ask Alp if you could just bring up the first poll question, really about whether or not you're comfortable your organization's comfortable with documents being processed outside your organization. If you're not sure, I completely understand. But obviously, a lot of AI models, as most of you are aware, typically are performed online. Many of them, though, can be used by internal models as well. So just keen to understand whether you're really looking to leverage internal models, only models that are completely offline, available within your organization, as opposed to those that are strictly online as well. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of time for you to answer, but it's getting close to an even split. It was a no largely to begin with, and it's now close to a 50-50 between yes and no, almost an even split between yes, no, and I'm not sure. So thank you. Appreciate the answers. That's useful info for us as well. Obviously, as we look to figure out which models to integrate with, whether we should be focusing on internal models or models that are available online only. Obviously, it's important that we understand those things. So thank you for that. If I just come in here. Great. So maybe focusing now a little bit more on those two examples. So the content translation, for example, looking at how we can automate AI, automate content translation using AI. So typically, there's a lot of documents that may require translation for whatever purpose. And again, I'm not going to go through them all. That's not the purposes of here. It's really to talk about the mechanics as much as possible. But ultimately, it's important that you can obviously have an accurate translation rather than potentially using services with humans translating content. Obviously, if you perform that, via any kind of automation or automated process, you want to ensure that the results are accurate. So whether that's content in, clinical kind of related documentation, regulatory documents, quality, SOPs, work instructions, product information, marketing materials, or admin documents across the organization, whatever the content may be, there's obviously typically a need for translation often. So if you take an example, a scenario where you've got an international labs and you have labs in the US and South America as well, maybe in Brazil, and across Europe, and then over in Japan, and you have some SOPs, for example, in Japan, that you need to have translated automatically into English for use perhaps in the UK and the US, where perhaps obviously typically people need the content in English to be able to understand as well. But the content itself was authored originally in Japanese in the Japanese lab. So these are kind of things that we might want to do automatically. Or obviously, if you've got something in Portuguese, maybe in Brazil, that you need translated automatically also into English. So those kind of scenarios of things that beyond regulatory content, which is what we often talk about, there's obviously a lot of other content that might require that type of translation. So again, in terms of from a regulatory context as well, there's times where you need more than one conversion, not just a language from one to one, but you may want to translate from one to many languages. So you may have a need. In this case, I've got a workflow that's basically monitoring different repositories and is going to potentially create multiple language translations depending on the metadata that's available for the document. So in this case, I have my English language document, and depending on the results, the metadata that's available, I may then receive a French and a Japanese, for example, translation of that content. So the way that might look in something like SharePoint is you have I'm just using SharePoint here, would work exactly the same way, whether you're using Documentum, whether you're using Veeva, whether you're using Ennov, whether you're using SharePoint, it doesn't matter what it is. The concept is the same. Leveraging metadata, where here, for example, I'm defining what is the language I want to translate my content to. So I have a piece of metadata available for each document. In this case, it says French on the document, and that could then trigger an activity in DocShifter to pick up the document and actually translate it. I may have a trigger here. That could also be when the document is sent to a job queue in Documentum, the file would it would look for that piece of metadata and know that I should translate and create a French translation. So I look at that translation. Again, in this case, I can define what language I want, send it off to be translated here, for example, as well. Basically, the workflow will be looking for content in that repository, and in this case, many other repositories too. It would look for that piece of metadata and then kick out a language translation, and in this case, create a PDF conversion of it as well, and then store it back into SharePoint in this case. So what we'll end up with is an English language document that will then have either, whatever language it may be, one or potentially multiple translations created simultaneously. And that could all be fully automatic without any human steps whatsoever, apart from the document having to have a piece of metadata available to it, which could be done automatically as the document works through its life cycle. So kind of that's typically what would happen here with translation. Again, can be fully automated. You can, if you like, send jobs individually, one by one, to be translated directly to DocShifter if you choose. But typically, the higher value comes from it being a fully automated process without any human steps being necessary. It reduces risk more. The more you automate it, the more you take out those human steps, the less risk typically that's involved. And typically what that is involved for those, especially those that are existing customers, this is typically just an additional module. So it's an upcoming module that is that leverages different language models, different AI models that you can select from. And again, we've tested it with various ChatGPT models, Claude 3, but we can integrate with basically just about any model. And we'll ask a question in just a moment, which models you may be familiar with, which models you're looking to leverage already or already leveraging. But ultimately, it's a very simple module where you can define kind of how the translation should take place, and that module can then be inserted in any workflow in DocShifter. With that, I did, as I alluded to just a second ago, just a quick poll question about models that you may currently be using or potentially look, either using or looking to use already, if you know. Completely understand if you're not aware, but if you're aware of any models that you're potentially leveraging, obviously it's useful for us to know. Obviously, ChatGPT is the one most people have heard of before, typically even outside of kind of complex usage. So, but there's a few others that are available that we understand people are using as well. So thank you. There's a lot of, again, obviously Microsoft Copilot, because I think a lot of people are using that, especially on their desktops, and then a lot of use of ChatGPT as well. So thank you very much. I appreciate the answers. That's going to be useful for us again as well. Excellent. I'm just going to close this down. So maybe looking a little bit at the redaction briefly as well. So again, in terms of redaction, there's a lot of content that might need redacting for whatever purpose. And again, I'm not really going into the detail of the why here, more about the, if you do need to redact, kind of what can we do about it. But ultimately, whether or not you need to redact out commercially confidential info, proprietary information about your products, for example, information about patients, names, addresses, medical records, or other personal information like, contact details, birth dates, for example, as well, or information from clinical trials, just as some examples of information you may need to redact. Again, the problem with redaction is it typically involves a lot of configuration. If you're looking to redact out names, you typically historically have had to kind of build up databases or quite databases of names, for example, so it knows what to search for through the content, for example. Obviously, AI, if I just come through here, allows for a lot of that to be done automatically without a lot of that configuration and building up of these databases, these data sets, if you like. So ultimately, these are, again, it's an upcoming module that allows for you to preview the redaction. So you could take content and at a certain lifecycle state, you could get a preview of what would be redacted. And later in the lifecycle, it could actually perform the redaction as well. You can specify which categories of content you want to redact, whether that's names, addresses, email addresses, phone numbers, product-related information, whatever other information you like. And depending on the model that you're using, the way in which you train the data, the model obviously might differ. But typically, most of the models you can train to include some company-specific data as well. Again, we're not going to go into that. If you want to have separate conversations later, we can obviously discuss how you might train the model that you're using. So again, you can specify the model you want to use. So it may be that in some cases, you're using one model, but for other types of redaction, you may have other categories of information available that you don't have in other models. So it's possible that you may use different models for different types of redaction because you have different kind of categories of information available in different models as well. You got a method of redaction as well. How do you want to redact the text? Do you want to black out the text, just provide a black box over the text? Do you want to actually delete the text or mask the text with other text, for example, as well? If you're masking the text, what text do you want to replace it with, and so on as well. So if you look at the very simple, a very, very simple example, but just it kind of highlights quite well, I think, kind of how the difference between AI-based redaction and kind of data-driven redaction, where you're building like a database of terms as well. But if I take this very simple example where I've just got some basic information about myself, I wish I was only 52 years old. I'm now 53, so I obviously wrote this a few weeks ago. But I got some information about myself and a dummy address, etc. as well. And what I've done is I've specified in the workflow, a very simple workflow that I just want to redact content from documents coming into these repositories. And I can specify what info I want to redact. Based on the settings that I've made or how I've configured it, I can then get results depending on what I've actually selected, how I want to redact it, whether I want to black out the text that I'm redacting, whether I want to simply delete the text, as you see in the second screen. The bottom left is replacing the redacted text with some predefined text, and obviously then performing or just including asterisks instead of the actual characters. So with that, the important thing to point out is that obviously the slight difference here is if you're using data-driven kind of redaction, typically it's tricky to have, for example, here I've got a sentence where it says, hello there, Paul Island actually does not come from Ireland. So it knows the difference between Paul Island, Ireland being my surname. It knows to redact out Paul Island, but it knows that Ireland in the context here where it says not from Ireland, knows that's not my name. It's not a name in that case because it understands the context through AI rather than it just being a database that is looking up individual names like Ireland, and then it would redact Ireland in the sentence here as well. So it kind of shows in a very simple way that difference, if you like, leveraging AI is it understands the context of that. Same thing with the translation. It understands the actual meaning of the sentence and actually translates it in a meaningful way, rather than translating just the individual words. Similar concept. So just a couple of very quick examples of end-to-end examples where you go beyond just the AI step. So just looking at a couple of very simple workflows. They go a little bit further. In this case, I've got a workflow that's monitoring a SharePoint folder. It's then translating to a language that's set in the metadata of my repository. So the metadata may say to translate to French, so it will translate to French. On another document, it may say translate to German. Another one, it may say to Spanish and Japanese, for example. So it can differ one by one. So it translates to another language. It checks then for the file type, whether it's a docx or a PDF. If it's a Word file, it's going to basically analyze the Word document and perform a validation and fix the Word document. If it's a PDF file, it's going to analyze it using a PDF validator and actually potentially fixing the PDF file before then converting the results to a compliant PDF and storing the results in SharePoint. So ultimately, as I say, in this case, AI is just one step in a longer workflow. It doesn't have to be a standalone process. It can be one step in a longer end-to-end flow as well. Another example being where you're monitoring a SharePoint folder and you're applying redactions using AI and then converting those results to a compliant PDF, adding an overlay with pagination, headers, footers, and adding a table of contents and saving the results into SharePoint. So again, I'm not showing you the results because in many other sessions, we've shown what these things look like before, but ultimately, again, AI is just one step in the flow. And really just in terms of final thoughts, that's just an important point to kind of highlight is that, again, AI is being used just as a step within an automated flow. It's not standalone, doesn't have to be a standalone process. It can be part of the wider automation as well. And really the idea being to streamline those processes for content preparation, leveraging metadata to kind of control how the AI is used. The whole framework around automation is providing some control over the use of AI. The metadata is controlling what options should be used. And just you're adding AI steps to existing content workflows or refining them or creating new ones that new workflows that leverage AI where it makes sense. All of that with the aim of reducing risk via automation. So with that, I just wanted to ask one quick poll question at the end. I did mention that these are things that we're working on, we're developing. So we are looking to have a formal beta program where we're looking for companies to potentially try the product out in beta form and provide some input as well. So just curious of those that may be interested in being a part of that beta program as well, where you could access the system, access the AI capabilities, whether you're existing Docshifter customer or not, whether or not you'd actually be able to do that. So good for us to know that. And obviously just a couple of other questions for you there in the final poll. So with that, I'll just leave that up and running. I think I'm a minute or so over, so I apologize for keeping you a couple of minutes late, but hopefully this was interesting. If you are interested in seeing anything in more detail, because of how long things take with processing the AI, I've not actually shown you live demonstration here. So if you do want to arrange a live demo, please just reach out and we could obviously arrange that at any point using any of your own content, genericized content, or dummy content as well. So with that, I want to thank everybody for your time and hopefully see you at a future webinar, the one back in December, hopefully. And thanks again. Take care. Thank you.